Our topic of today's devotion is divine scrutiny and disclosure. And it comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 5. And before we get into that verse, I want to take just a moment and look at the two verses before that in order to help us identify the context. Now, Paul went to the city of Corinth. He stayed there for quite a long time and preached the gospel. And as a result, he led many of the citizens to faith in Christ. He built up the church, and then he eventually, after establishing the church, he left. Later, Peter came and ministered to the church. Apollos came and ministered to the church. And then the Corinthians started comparing their spiritual father, Paul, who led them to Christ, who started their church. They began comparing him with the Apostle Paul and with Apollos. Apollos was an amazing preacher. He was a golden-throated orator. There were no preachers more eloquent than Apollos. And they began to compare, the Corinthians began to compare Apollos, this amazing preacher, with their spiritual father, the Apostle Paul. And not a few people said about Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 10, Paul's appearance and his speech are despicable. Now, I think there's some truth in that, but I don't think that Paul was a pleasant person to look at. There's a written account about Paul's appearance by a man who claims that he saw him, that Paul was a short, bald-headed, and bow-legged man. And we know from Galatians 4 that he often had a disease of the eye. He tells the Galatians, despite my appearance, you all received me as an angel of God. And had it been possible, you would have plucked your own eyes out and given them to me. And I think Paul's eyes were infected and they often oozed with pus. So I think he was difficult to look at. I think his sermons were hard to listen to. Now, D.L. Moody, who had a third-grade education and yet started the Moody Bible Institute, was not an eloquent speaker. He started a Sunday school class for children, and he wouldn't speak. He didn't think he could speak. He would bring other people in to teach his children. But then D.L. Moody started preaching, and when he went to England and preached to vast crowds, not a few people disliked him because he butchered the king's English. He was not an articulate speaker. He was like Paul. But D.L. Moody and the Apostle Paul had one thing going for them. The power of God were upon those two men. Now, the Corinthians are beginning to criticize Paul, think of him in lesser terms, and making matters worse, after Paul's departure, after Apollos and Peter were there, false teachers, false apostles came into the church, and they found the people, the Corinthians, speaking, thinking quite highly of Paul. They didn't like that. The false teachers and the false apostles wanted the Corinthians to think highly of themselves, so they began to criticize Paul and put him down. And the Corinthians began to be influenced by their attitude. And so the Corinthians began to criticize Paul. They began to lose respect of him, even though he was their spiritual father. And in verse 3, Paul mentions how he feels about this. He says in verse 3, but to me, now the word to me translates this amoi right here, which is an ethical dative, and it means this. Paul means this. Now, when other people are criticized and judged and put down by people, their attitude is probably going to be, I don't like this. This is terrible. It hurts. I dislike it. It's really tearing me apart. But Paul's going to say, that's not my attitude. But to me, it is a very insignificant thing that I should be examined, criticized, judged, put down by you. Now, notice what he doesn't say here. He doesn't say, to me, it is nothing that I should be examined by you. And when he says, when he doesn't say nothing, what he's saying is, I have to admit, I'm disappointed. It does hurt, but it is an insignificant matter that I should be examined by you or by any human day. Now, the word day is metonymy for court. It comes from the idea every man shall have his day in court. In fact, I do not even examine myself. And he elaborates on that in verse 4. For although I am not aware of one thing against myself, Now, I tend to think that Paul is overstating the case. I tend to think he's using the figure of speech we call hyperbole. I don't think he means that literally, because the holiest of God's saints are very aware of their inadequacy, their sins, their weaknesses, their failures, their tendency to sin against God and drift from the Lord. I think what Paul is just stressing here in this first line is I have a clear conscience. I have a clean moral slate. My character, my conduct are in good ethical condition. Now, the second line, he drops that figure of speech hyperbole, and now he speaks more to the point. I am not nevertheless really innocent because of this. In other words, right now, I don't know anything bad about myself. That doesn't mean there's not something wrong with me. It does mean I'm just not aware of it. Instead, and here's the line that I want us to remember, the one who examines me is the Lord. Okay, now let's go to our verse that we want to focus on, and it's 1 Corinthians 4:5. And at this point, all I want to do is read the English translation beneath it. Here's the Greek text. Here's my English translation. I want us to just read the translation and familiarize ourselves with this verse, and then we'll get into it in a bit more detail. Verse 5, so stop reaching a premature verdict on anything. In other words, stop prematurely judging me until the Lord appears, since he will both bring to light the hidden things of darkness and will expose the motives of the hearts. And then each person will receive proper recognition from God. Now, here is my thesis. What Jesus will do at his second coming to earth, namely, reveal each person's deeds and motives lying behind those deeds. He quite often does that now. That is, the Lord periodically brings to light noble acts which the doer of them did not tell others about. The aim is to commend and recommend him to others. And Christ also discloses people's sins, vices, lies, thefts, dishonesty, crimes, etc. A divine disclosure of bad things is for the purpose of rebuking the wrongdoer, making him stop his evil, giving him a chance to reform, or to, if necessary, punish him. Now, when our younger son, Jeff, was in high school, one night at midnight, I woke up very thirsty. And so I left the bedroom, went into the kitchen, I'm drinking some water, and it seems to me that I hear voices coming from our dark backyard at midnight. So I lifted up the Venetian blind and looked out, and behind our outdoor storage house, I saw Jeffrey and his best friend Robert smoking. At that point, I didn't know what they were smoking. And I didn't inform them that I was there, that I saw them. I just went back to bed. But early in the morning, I woke up and went out behind our outdoor storage house and looked, and I found paraphernalia that is used when people smoke marijuana. So I brought him to Jeff when he woke up, and I said, Jeff, do you know anything about this paraphernalia? And I really appreciated his humility and honesty. He said, Dad, I'm so sorry. Last night I was smoking marijuana, and I won't do that anymore. Were you by yourself, or was somebody else with you? And he said, no, my best friend Robert was with me. And I said, okay, Jeff, I want you to tell Robert I'm going to give him 24 hours to tell his father. And then after those 24 hours, I'm going to talk to Robert's dad and make sure that that he did tell his father. So Jeff and Robert were doing something they shouldn't have been engaged in, and God brought it to light. How do you do that? By waking me up with a thirsty mouth. Years ago, Linda was one of my students at Moody Bible Institute, and she was so excited. She was going to spend the summer in Portugal working in a church. And she said, the pastor has invited me over there. He's going to take me around on his pastoral visits, and he's going to teach me how he deals with people, prays for them, encourages them. He's going to teach me how to prepare Bible lessons, teach Sunday school, etc. I'm really looking forward to it. So she went to Portugal for the summer, and when she came back, I said, Linda, how was your internship? And she said, I am so very disappointed. I thought the pastor was going to spend time with me and sharpen my skills in ministry, but he's so lazy. he didn't want to do any more work than necessary. He just really disregarded me for the whole summer. So I just made myself busy finding things to do in the church and ministering to people as best I could. But it was largely a self-taught internship program. I am so disappointed. And then she said, on the day that I was scheduled to fly back to America, I thought, well, I should stop by the church and at least thank the pastor for having me over and spend the summer working in his church. And so I went over there, and when I walked in, I knocked on the pastor's door, and he invited me in. And he was, when I went in, counseling a young woman in the church. And I said, Pastor, I'm leaving for America now, and I just want to thank you for inviting me to spend the summer here with you and working in the church. And I said goodbye to him. And I went out and got in the taxi cab to be taken to the airport. And then it dawned on me, I just forgot and left my purse in the pastor's office. So I went back in there. And when I went in, I caught the pastor, who's a married man, in a tight embrace, passionately kissing on the mouth this single young woman in his church. And I said to them, what are the two of you doing? And the pastor said to me, I'm giving my Christian sister a holy kiss. And I said, oh, no, you're not. That is a very deep, passionate embrace, deep, passionate kiss, mouth to mouth. And Pastor, you are a married man. You should be leading the people in this church and this young woman in the ways of God. And then she turned her attention to the young woman. And she said, and you are the best friend of the pastor's wife, and you're doing this behind his back. You two ought to be ashamed of yourself. And I got in the taxi cab and was taken to the airport. And I said, Linda, I have a completely different view on your internship than you did. God sent you over there, if for no other reason, to disclose their unhealthy relationship and catch them in the act, to give the pastor and that woman an opportunity to quit before they got too deep into that relationship. Your internship was extremely useful to the work of God in that church. Now, maybe I said this in an earlier video. I don't remember. Please excuse me if I'm repeating it. But years ago, I was the interim pastor of a church in Wakanda, Illinois. And while I was there, a student, girl A, a student at Wakanda High School, went into the school business office to fill out a form. As she's standing at the counter filling out her form, another student, girl B, comes in to the business office to also fill out a form. And girl A and girl B did not know each other. To assist her in filling out her form, girl B opens her wallet, takes something out of it, and sets the wallet between her and girl A on the counter with the wallet open. Well, girl A looks over and spots a picture of the man in the open wallet, and girl A asks girl B, what would the picture of this particular man be doing in your wallet? And girl B said, that man is my mother's boyfriend. Girl A said, he can't be. That man is my father, who is still married and living with my mother. Now, what was going on here? The father of girl A was maintaining an adulterous relationship with the mother of girl B. Nobody knew it except one person, God, and he brought that unhealthy, inappropriate relationship to light in order to rebuke those two adults, the father of one girl, the mother of another girl, and get them to stop what they were doing. Years ago, my wife and I were involved with a Chicago businessman in his early 40s, married to a wife in her mid-30s, and they had a 6-year-old son. They'd been having trouble in their marriage, and one day the wife called me and said, Dr. Sauer, my husband's plane has just left for 2 weeks. Has just left for Guatemala, where he's going for 2 weeks of business. And I am packing up and I am leaving my husband. I'm separating from him. I'm calling to tell you. And I asked her, well, why are you separating from him? And she told me. And I said to her, I really don't think that you've got good enough reasons to separate and leave your husband. May I make a suggestion? Don't separate. When your husband comes back in 2 weeks, why don't you bring him over to our house? And my wife and I will sit down with you and your husband and see if we can't help straighten some things out in your marriage. She said, okay, that's a good idea. So I won't leave. I'll wait till he comes back and we'll come and see you and your wife. Well, a day or two before those 2 weeks were finished, I got a second call also from this wife right here. And she said, Dr. Sauer, I just want you to know that I have left my husband, and here's why. The other day, I was out in a neighborhood visiting some of our neighbors when my husband was down in Guatemala speaking to a Guatemalan businessman. The cell phone in my husband's pocket accidentally activated without his knowledge. And it called our home phone because I was out in the neighborhood. I wasn't there to answer it. And so his phone call goes into voicemail. And as he's speaking to the businessman down there, my husband's words were recorded on the voicemail. And what was her husband saying to the Guatemalan businessman? My wife back in Chicago is mentally crazy. She's not. She's a wonderful young Christian woman, and her mind is sound and healthy. And her husband said to the Guatemalan businessman, I have already transferred all of our money from our Chicago bank to the bank in another country. When I get home in a day or two, I'm going to send my wife out on a shopping spree. I'm going to take our son. I've already got our flight to another country scheduled, and my son and I are leaving America, going to another country, and I've got all the money. I've got our son, and my wife won't know where I am. And so she told me later, when she listened to it, that recorded voicemail was God's gift to me. And she said, Dr. Sauer consulted a lawyer, and he said, your husband is guilty of plotting international kidnapping, and that is a serious crime. It is a high felony. And she was ready for him. And she said, do you have any advice for me? And I said, yes. Why don't you leave a note for him on the kitchen table telling him when he gets in today, would you meet me at 3 p.m. in Dr. Sauer's office at Moody Bible Institute if you're interested in living with me, if you're interested in living with our 6-year-old son. And so when he got home and read that, he made a beeline to my office, and he was a broken man. She brought to my office a tape recording of his conversation with that businessman, and she played it. And I said, was that you talking? He said it was. Were you actually going to take the son and all their money to another country? And he said it was. He was broken and contrite. Years ago at Moody, I had a young man in my class. He was in his mid-30s. He was married. He had several children. He was a full-time student at Moody. He was a part-time youth pastor in the local church. And this student got into an adulterous affair with the church secretary. The student, his conscience didn't bother him. He was enjoying the affair. The secretary, her conscience wasn't bothering her. She was enjoying the affair until the secretary's 15-year-old daughter came home and said, Mother, I have a heavy heart. I've got a defiled conscience. I have to tell you, Mother, that the youth pastor and I have been having sex with each other. The mother was shocked, alarmed. Now her attitude changed about her own affair with the youth pastor. She went to the pastor and told him. The pastor went to the police and told them. Where do you think my student ended up? In prison for sexually touching an underage girl. God brought that affair to light. Now, Gerald was really, for most of the time that I knew him, a real fine Christian man. He just got off track. He was the principal of a wonderful, highly effective Christian school, had a good reputation, kindergarten through 12. But being the principal, he had access to the school funds, and he began to pilfer some of the money and put it in his pocket. And he didn't take much at first because he didn't want it to be noticed, but he kept stealing more and more, and eventually it was brought to the attention of the school authorities, and they dismissed him and required him to pay back all that money on the threat, if you don't pay it back, we're going to the police and you're going to be arrested. Sally was the daughter of a pastor down in Chicago, and she went not to bars in Chicago, but to bars in the suburbs so that this wouldn't get out. But she got on the tables and performed lewd dancing before the men who were drinking at bars. And God had that information brought to her parents, who dealt with her and made her stop. Now, it took 56 years for this information to come to me. And before this information was brought to me last month, the thought of it never visited my mind. And had this information not been made known to me last month, I could have lived another 100 years on earth. And the thought that the information brought to me would have never crossed my mind. There was a man who has long since died, and I knew well. And this certain man slowly, silently, secretly, skillfully, strategically plotted my death. Now, when this information came to me, going back in my memory were 7 events that happened to me. And when those 7 events happened, I remember viewing them as extremely strange, unique, unforeseen. Why did these things happen? And back then, I just thought, well, I guess it's just one of those things, flukes, that arbitrarily happen to a person without any known reason, perhaps a bit arbitrarily. But when this information brought to me last month, now those 7 things made perfect sense. I could see why they happened. Now I knew who was behind them. Now I'm saying that to you, all of this to you about this certain man for this reason. There may be now or in the near future some person, some people who dislike you immensely, and they are going to plan to hurt you in some way. Probably not take your life, but they mean to bring injury to you, perhaps in your education, in your occupation, in your romantic relationship, in your marriage. As a parent, they're going to cause you trouble. They're going to hurt you socially, in your reputation, etc. Now, you may never know that this person is going to plot against you for 56 years. Or maybe you never will know in this life. You'll know only when you get to heaven. But what I want to stress is this, that God will know the plans that are being made against you, and the Lord is very capable of protecting you from them. Now, this man's plot against me, I want to say 2 things. First of all, God thwarted his efforts to have my life taken. And that's only half the story. What he planned for me backfired, blew up in his face, and happened to him. Okay, now let's get to the main focus of this lesson, and that's 1 Corinthians 4:5. And I want to touch on certain words, phrases, and clauses, take the verse apart, put it back together, interpret it, and draw appropriate applications. And I'm going to start with the very first word, hoste, and this is to be translated so. Now, what is hoste? It is an inferential conjunction. Looking back to the last clause in verse 4, the Lord is the one who judges me. That's what it's looking back to. That Christ assesses it. Looking back to the last clause in verse 4, that Christ assesses, judges his servants. This conjunction so draws a conclusion which is expressed by the following command, and that command is, and I'm putting it in bold, black italics, me pra kairuti trinity, to be translated down here, stop reaching a premature verdict on anything. On anything? Well, let's begin with you stop judging me, and then anything else. So here is the clause right here. I've repeated the Greek text, repeated my translation. The mood. This is what grammarians call a prohibitive imperative demanding action and progress to stop. What Paul is saying is, you Corinthians, or many of you Corinthians, are now engaged in criticizing me, judging me, putting me down, and it must stop now. The prepositional phrase, kairu is strategically placed. Kairu means before the time, before the appointed time. These two words ought to be right here at the end of the clause, but for emphasis, they are put right between the negative conjunction, the negative adverb may, that goes with this imperative, stop judging before the proper time. So the prepositional phrase is strategically placed, literally stop before the proper time judging anything. The phrase is nuanced, it's temporal, before time, or premature. The phrase's object is kairu. Kairu is an appointed proper time. What Paul is saying is the appropriate time for judgment has not yet arrived, and it is not your responsibility to be judging me. Now, I want to go to the third line here, and the question is, how long must the Corinthians abstain from judgment? Heos on elthei ha kurios, to be translated, until the Lord appears. All right? So this is a temporal clause, and it does several things. Firstly, it identifies the preceding appointed proper time to be Jesus' return to earth. Secondly, it informs how long judgment is to be suspended until Jesus returns to earth. And number three, this expression, heios, until, plus this particle on, express temporal uncertainty. How so? Jesus' return to earth is certain, but when he's going to return is uncertain. Now, I want to go to this clause that begins with a relative pronoun that is usually translated who, W-H-O. Has kai photise ta to skatus, to be translated, since he will both bring to light the hidden things of darkness. All right, so I want to comment on it. Here again is the clause that I want to comment on. Now, as I just mentioned, has is a relative pronoun, usually translated who, but I'm going to change it. I'm going to translate has with these two words, since he. And the reason I'm going to do that is the relative pronoun in Greek, has about 10 different uses, one of which is causal. The causal relative pronoun gives the reason, the basis, the justification for what's just been said. So has is a relative clause justifying the premature judgment sin. Stop judging until Christ appears. Why? Since he will both bring to light the hidden things of darkness. Now we're going to have two kais here to be translated both and. These are correlative conjunctions indicating that Jesus, upon returning to earth, will do two things. And the first thing is this right here, photissa. Firstly, Jesus will pour light on something as the sun pours its light on the earth. And what he's going to pour light on are the the hidden things, unknown and out of sight. We don't see them. They're happening. They're going on. It's just that to most people, they're not aware of it. And these are characterized by the hidden things, two skatus of darkness, things that are concealed and probably many of which are evil, and that's why they're concealed. Now, I want to go to the next to the last clause. Here it is, kai phanerose, etc. And this is going to tell us the second thing Jesus will do when he comes back to earth. And this is to be translated, notice, and he will expose the motives of the hearts. So here is the clause to be commented on. Here again is the translation, kai. And as the second thing Jesus will do upon returning, phanerose. This future tense states he will expose something. And that which is going to be exposed is the direct object, tas boulos, not merely one's actions and deeds, but also his motives, the decisions he made that lie behind his actions. And these motives will come ton cardion. They will come from the decisions of one's will. Actually, the word heart right here means one's will and the decisions that are made in the human will. And then the final clause will tell us what will be the outcome when Jesus comes back and exposes the deeds and the motives of every person. And so here's the clause I'm commenting on. Kai tate ha, pi, nos, etc. I'm going to translate. And then each person will receive proper recognition from God. All right, here is the last clause. I'm going to begin with these two words, kaitate, and then refers to Jesus' second coming when he will expose people's deeds and motives. Ha, painos, usually translated praise, here it means proper recognition. Why? For some people, the divine recognition given them will be positive. Praise for their good deeds. Praise for their pure motives. For others, recognition will be negative or bad, hence only proper recognition. When Christ exposes some people's motives and deeds, they are evil, they are bad. He won't praise them. He'll give them appropriate recognition of judgment and if necessary, punishment. Genesatai will receive, states this event occurs at Jesus' return, hikasto. The divine assessment will be given to each person with no one left out or overlooked. Not one person will fall through the cracks of judgment. And the judgment will be made apa to you. Every person's assessment will come from God, the omniscient and infallible judge, whose verdict is final. So here is the translation. Verse 5 again, my final translation. So, stop reaching a premature verdict on anything until the Lord appears, since he will both bring to light the hidden things of darkness and will expose the motives of the hearts, and then each person will receive proper recognition from God, good or bad. Now, my second thesis. What Jesus will do when he returns to earth the second time, namely, reveal every person's concealed deeds with their motives. He periodically is doing some of that now. That is, prior to the second coming, the Lord quite often brings to light both the good and the bad things that some people are doing. When he reveals a person's good deeds, it is to commend that person to others. When he reveals a person's bad deeds, it is redemptive. It is for his good, to get him to stop the evil, to turn from it, and to mend his ways. Like this Christian man, Larry. Larry is a Christian, and some years ago he called me on the phone and said, Dr. Sauer, my wife has just separated from me and left, and I want you to tell me how I can get her back. And I asked, well, why did she leave you? And he said, a couple of weeks ago, she woke up unusually early, not finding me in bed. She went to the other end of the house, peered through a door, and saw me. I didn't see her. She found me looking at pornography on my computer. And she went back to bed. Well, after I'd gone to work, she got up and went into my computer and found all my pornography. And she found out that I was carrying on a verbal and emotional affair with a 19-year-old woman in Los Angeles. And I said, well, Larry, I want you to tell me how you hid that pornography and that emotional affair from your wife and from God. Tell me, so I know how to hide it in case I want to have get into pornography in an affair. And he said, well, I hid it from my wife, but I didn't hide it from God. And I said, that's right. You thought as long as you hid it from your wife, you were safe. You should have been far more concerned about God. You can't hide anything from God. He sees everything we do. And God's not going to remain passive and do nothing, arms folded. He's going to, if we don't deal with it, if we don't turn away from it, he's going to disclose it. He'll bring it to the attention of people who need to know about it so they can deal with us. And so he asked his wife to reconsider, and she said, no. You're not the same man I married. You drifted from the Lord, and you drifted from me. He rolled up his sleeves, and he began to pursue God. Long story short, his wife told me 6 months later, my husband was so desperate to get me back. He was desperate to regain his relationship with the Lord, and he did it. In fact, spiritually, he has surpassed me. He is so zealous for God, he leaves me in shame that I'm not as zealous with God as he is. So that divine disclosure, that rebuke, worked for Larry's benefit. Okay, by way of application, a number of things. Firstly, be realistic. Jesus and Paul were misjudged and criticized. You and I will be too. Be open to criticism directed at you, but prayerfully weigh it. Consider the immediate source. Does it come from a stranger, a foe, a friend? Have they been influenced by others? Consider the ultimate source, the father of lies. Satan will use the lips of others to get into our head. Ask yourself, how do the majority of people see me? Does everybody else feel about me the way that my critic does? Secondly, share this burden of being criticized with somebody. Encourage one another daily. How does God see me? Limit the criticism directed at you as a very significant thing like Paul did. The people judging you are not the ones who are supposed to be judging you. 3, we may be able to conceal sin from people, but it is impossible to hide it from God. He sees it, and if I don't forsake it, he will bring it to the attention of those who need to know so they can deal with me about it. If we would judge ourselves, we would not be judged by God. 4, when necessary, let's ask the Lord to reveal to us what is in the hearts of others whom we need to know about, like the person you increasingly are becoming romantically fond of. If you're getting interested in somebody romantically, you need to ask the Lord to reveal, Lord, please reveal to me whatever I need to know about this person that I'm growing fond of. You already know everything about this person. Would you begin to disclose what's in this person's character and conduct? Give me a good idea of what this person is going to be like 5, 20, 50 years down the road. 5thly, Paul was such a godly person that he knew nothing bad about himself. He could have asked his critics, has God brought something to your attention, anything appropriate about me? 6thly, we must take seriously and soberly the oft-repeated remark in Scripture, God is my witness. He really is. That the eyes of heaven are also upon us ought to be an additional motive for us to walk the straight and narrow way. Then one day we'll receive positive, proper recognition from God. One thing that keeps me from having an affair is there is no way I can hide it from heaven. And if I get into an affair, it will be exposed. Remember what the book of Numbers says? Be sure your sin will be found out. The Bible tells me in advance what's going to happen. I may be able to hide an affair from my wife, my students, from you, but the problem is I can't hide it from God, who sees it, knows it, and if I don't stop, he will disclose it. Lastly, remember when heaven brings our sin to light, it's redemptive, it's for our benefit, and it will be to our advantage if we take the disclosure to heart and deal with it appropriately. Lord, I'm asking that your Holy Spirit, who's the author of these words, and our teacher, would burn these truths deeply into our soul so they have a wholesome effect, knowing that your eye is upon us, and if we do anything wrong and try and conceal it, it's futile. You will bring it to the attention of people who need to know about it. Now give us ears to hear, Lord, when you point out what is amiss in our life, that we take it to heart. We let it work for us, and it improves our character and conduct. In Jesus' name, amen. Like Jesus said, let's have ears to hear, even if we don't want to.